everybody, and a very warm welcome back to the latest episode of Hidden Jewels of Soul and Disco. If you have seen my unboxing video, I pointed out a record which took me years to finally get it, and it's actually one of my favorite soul records. You only find it on YouTube, where somebody was kind enough to upload a needle drop. It's not been reissued, which I think is a shame, but if you have the chance, if you see it in the wild, go and grab it. Otherwise, I can only recommend that you check it out on YouTube. Therefore, this week we are featuring J.J. Barnes. Why J.J.'s recordings for Motown were never released during the time he was under contract with Motown, and why he's considered the king of Northern Soul, well, we'll discuss this right now. This is the story of J.J. Barnes. On June the 20th in 1943, a devastating riot was going on in Black Bottom in Detroit. Black Bottom is a community of African American people. And it was devastating because riots are most of the time devastating, but over a weekend, 35 people were killed, 25 of them Black people. In November the 30th, J.J. was born to Leroy and Eddie Mae Barnes. So he was born in the aftermath of a riot. And it won't be the last time that he had to deal with a riot and also the aftermath of it. His father was in a very famous gospel group, the Evangelist Singers, and they later renamed themselves the Detroiters. His parents separated very early on, and for the first 7 years of his life, J.J. didn't even know his mother. He lived with his father in a house in Hastings, Detroit, and the house was damp. So J.J. was from very early on suffering from anemia. And his father was so desperate to do something, and he was also constantly touring, which was a blessing on one hand, but on the other hand, well, he had a little child. So what he brought his child to a woman who had a whole house, and for the first 7 years of his life, J.J. grew up with this woman. And looking back, he always remembered it as a very loving relationship. When he was around 7 years old, his mother found him and she remarried. And his new stepfather was a member of the gospel group, the Cumberland River Singers. So he grew up in this family which were all very musical interested. And one day, when the mailman got around the corner, he heard the family singing harmonies. And this mailman was no other than Fred Brown. And the mailman had actually 2 labels, Cable and Mickey's. So what he did, he signed immediately J.J. and his sister. When he signed that contract with Fred Brown, he was actually in a vocal group which was called Hurricane Travelers, who themselves had a great career ahead of them, a lasting career. His first single in the early 1960s was "Won't You Let Me Know?" And one member of the group who were doing the musical tracks were James Jameson, with some other people who became, and I think this name is familiar to you, became the core section of the Funk Brothers. So you can imagine that the material recorded back then is top notch. Also, I want to point out that on the backing vocals there is a group which was called the Delphis. And the Delphis later on became Martha Reed and the Vandals. The song was played on a radio station with a huge range, and it was called WLAC. And Martha later on recalls the first time she heard that single on the radio, and I quote, "A fleeting moment of glory. Now we knew what it felt like to hear ourselves on the radio." Barnes stayed with Brown till 1965. Around that time, the soul music was kind of changing. It got a little more polished, and JJ wanted to have a new, fresh label, which inspired him even further. Ed Windgate is also known as the first black godfather of Detroit. He earned his money with gambling. And with the money he earned, he built a state-of-the-art studio, where, for example, labels like Ric-Tic recorded exclusively in that studio. And that was the point when Barnes was really developing into a professional singer. There's one single which became later on a huge success for Barnes in the United Kingdom. And this single was called Real Humdinger. And Al Kent remembers from that recording session. The spring sun slanted into the hallway. The song just seemed to stand on its own two legs and walked off. Actually, when they were in the studio recording, they were waiting for James Jamerson to come in, and he came in 20 minutes late, and he was also drunk. But the recording session turned out to be a huge success. If it was because of Jamerson was drunk, well, we'll never know that. At that time, Barry Gordy was in dire need of a recording facility. And also, Ed's success with the labels and all of this kind of grew into competition. And it would have been great to see how that turned out. But in the end, Barry Gordy bought for $1 million the recording facilities, the contracts, the master tape, everything what has been done at that point with this label. And also the contracts for George Clinton, Edwin Starr, and J.J. Barnes went to Motown. So one day Ed called J.J. in his office and said, "Well, I sold it. You now have to deal with Motown." And Barnes went directly to Ralph Salzer and they discussed the further ongoing. And at that point, in that moment of life, JJ thought, okay, now I'm at Motown and now I'm in the major league and now everything will be great. Really? Soon JJ started recording with Show Me the Way and Every Time I See You Go Wild. You remember these very, very successful Motown singers, do you? No, you can't, because none of his recordings he did with Motown were ever released during the time he was under contract with Motown. And the reason is that, well, Marvin Gaye plays a part in this. So JJ was recording, and if you hear these tracks, they are tremendously great. What he did at Motown was fantastic. And he was like, okay, when's my record coming out? And well, Eddie Holland actually came to him, and this is a recall from JJ, he came to him and said, well, you know, the thing is, Marvin is bitching and bitching and bitching. And the thing is, you sound so alike, and you're a powerhouse, and Marvin having this huge problem. So he was like, okay. And one day he was standing outside of the Motown building, and Marvin came up to him and said, well, JJ, you're a bad mother. And JJ didn't know what to do with that. So he didn't really know how to handle this, and he started to feel uncomfortable with Motown. So he had his final weeks at Motown, and he started to work on a song. And this song turned to be out his biggest hit ever. And this was called Baby Please Come Back. Actually, Stevie Wonder got into the studio and heard Barnes working on that song, and he kind of helped him with it to make it a really all in all perfect song. And JJ said, hell, Steve, you helped me with that. I'm giving you co-credit on writing it. And he said, no, it's going to be a big hit, and that's for you. And it turned out to be, like I said, his biggest hit. But that also wasn't actually done with Motown. He took the song and gave it to Groovesville. He worked with Don Davis before, who was a producer, songwriter, famously, and they released it on Groovesville. And like I said, it became a huge hit. He also was for a short period of time with Stax, where there was also a compilation album coming out on the Vault label, but also actually the early 70s were pretty dry for JJ. Let's go back briefly to 1967. Actually to July the 23rd of 1967. In the afternoon, JJ appeared at the Fox Theatre. The top Detroit soul artists were performing there. And JJ was on top form. He had his hit single out there, Baby Please Come Back, and also Chains of Love. And you can see how famous he actually was. This is a picture of the Fox Theatre, and his name is actually under the one from Martha Reith. During the performance, he was informed, or somebody got into the theater and said, a riot is going on. JJ just left the stage, was looking outside, and he was shocked by what he saw. It was actually a riot going on, a pretty bad one. Martha Reith just finished singing Dancing in the Street. What a coincidence. And was told to please inform the people to leave the theater and go very, very slowly out of it and calmly, because there's something going on. And that's what she did. JJ thought, okay, I need to get out of here. It's very dangerous. Police is walking down the streets. Buildings are burning. People are robbing shops. So it was total chaos. He got all his stuff, got into his car, and decided to go to the Algiers Hotel. Because it was very close by. It was owned by Windgate, and he thought, okay, this might be the safest place to go there. When he arrived at the hotel, he was sitting in his car. He thought, okay, you know what? I'm driving home. Later that day, what happened at that hotel is something that never really gotten today, what really happened in that hotel. But it was rumored that there were snipers in the hotel. So police got into that hotel, and at the end of the day, people were dead. Some people were being harassed, being accused of things, being misused, being slapped. Gotten to a point, because it was a place where a lot of African American people said that they were stripped down their clothes, and police threw a knife on the bottom. And someone said, you know what? You pick up that knife and I'll shoot you, and say it was self-defense. So it's still very, very touching, and it's absolutely horrible what went down in these hours at that hotel. And even up to today, the police officers who were responsible for, and I say that, murder of that people, it was later on said it was self-defense, but these police people were never really charged for what happened. They didn't even tell what was going on in that hotel hours after the incident. They didn't communicate this to the supervisors. So slowly but surely things came out. Like I said, young people died in this, and the murders of these young African American people were never accused of that. Never put on trail for what happened. This riot in Detroit was one of the worst, if not the worst riot, which was going on at that time. And just a year later, Martin Luther King Jr. was shot in Memphis. So it was a horrible time going on. And also Barnes said that things were never the same as before.
In 100 places, Detroit is afire, the destroyer striking from as far as 3 miles away from this west side ghetto, where it all began early this morning with a police raid on an after-hours drinking parlor. There have been some reports of gunfire. Police are under orders not to fire. Rock and bottle throwing took some casualties among firemen, police, and 3 newsmen. A white man was stabbed this morning as he got off a bus in the area. No serious injuries are known. More than 200 looters have been arrested so far. Police officials say they do not have enough men to worry much about the looters. They are there to protect the firemen. 100 square blocks are now under siege. Governor Romney rushed to Detroit today to meet with Mayor Jerome Kavanaugh, who placed a curfew on the city at nightfall.
The troops came, but they were not instant peacemakers. Today has been uneasy. Last night was bad. Paratroopers came last night, disciplined and smart. Jeeps and buses rolled toward the burning, angry city, but they were an almost furtive weapon, most staying in their staging area, deploying only well after midnight. By then, snipers roved the city. Gunfire flickered from neighborhood to neighborhood. National Guardsmen and police, tired, nervous, sometimes hungry, fired at targets that vanished like shadows, ordered tenants out of one building, trying somehow to pin down the enemy. The battle cost lives. Someone shot and killed a fireman. A policeman wounded last night died today. Injured poured in. What started as a kind of carefree loot-in had become a war. The city confirms 25 dead. There are probably more. Among the wounded, over 40 police, 7 guardsmen, 17 firemen. Police have arrested something like 2,300, too many for the squad cars and Black Marias. They came by the busload. And the city kept burning. The riots spawned 1,000 fires. The sky writhed with spiraling smoke. Whole blocks smoldered. The smell was everywhere. Detroit breathed uneasily, covered by a layer of fine gray soot. CBS News correspondent Jack Lawrence was at the biggest blaze. The senselessness and tragedy of the Detroit riots can be summed up in what's happening here. The fire has been raging for more than 30 minutes. The people have been evacuated, and yet the firemen are unable to respond. The first fire engines arrived on Harrison Street after almost an hour, too late to save the block of 2-story wood houses. The firemen were calm, but there was near panic among many of their guards. The fear of snipers was as intense as the fire.
Watch it, Paul. If you're going to shoot, let's do it.
The firemen withdrew to the relief of some soldiers who said, "Let it burn."
At the Allen Temple Church, the Reverend W.H. Crenshaw said a myth had been shattered.
In our myth, we believed that housing was adequate. But at the same time, we knew that open housing was not practiced. Pray with us. In our myth, we believed we were building a new progressive city. But at the same time, there was little citizen participation in the planning of the city. In our myth, we believed that we were a humane city. But at the same time, we knew that we had failed to adequately relocate the displaced.
John Hart, CBS News, Detroit.
He was set to have an appearance in the Apollo Theatre. It was cancelled also due to the riots which were going on. If that would have led to another career step, well, it's not known, but still it was something that shocked America. And like I said, even today, people are suffering from these riots. In the 70s, like I said, nothing really was starting for JJ. But what happened was that Edwin Starr, who was doing a lot of appearances in the United Kingdom, said, "You know what? You are pretty hot in the UK." And he was like, "Huh? There's a Northern Soul scene and they love their song Real Humpendigger. And it's a top hit and you really need to go there. You need to make appearances." So from 1973 onwards, he actually used he went through 3 passports because he had so many appearances, sold out appearances in the United Kingdom, especially at the 100 Club in London. What came out of this is in the 70s 2 albums from JJ, which I can only recommend to you. The first one, where you hear also some snippets from, is Born Again. I mean, look at that cover art. This one took me years to find a clean copy of it. Usually it's hard to find. It's not been reissued, like I said in the beginning, which is a shame. And before we continue, let's hear some snippets so you'll know why I love this album so much.
You make me feel I belong, and like a habit, you keep on in your dream. The summer night bring back memories. Or am I just alone with you? Oh, I'm just a living baby.
If you see this album somewhere out there, go and get it. You Are a Living Doll is an absolutely stunning one. Can't You See Me Leaving You is tremendous, just from the beginning to the end. And look at this gorgeous picture of JJ. This was done on Perception and also been produced by Patrick Davis, who later on became a highly successful disco producer. So yeah, this is the Perception logo. Hope you can see this. And highly successful producer himself. So this album is one of my favorite soul albums out there. It's tremendously good. It wasn't a real hit back then, so you also have to consider marketing and all of this. We've gone through this a lot of time, so distribution and all of that, so you know the deal. 1975, Contempo released, and it's I think a UK-based label, released some Northern Soul classics from JJ because they were so famous up there, not including his Motown material, but I love the cover and all of this. I'm still also looking for this one to get, but a tremendously good album. The success of his UK appearances and releases from all of these singles led to a record deal in 1977, and that one ended in an album which was called J.J. Barnes' Sarah Smile. I'm honestly not so fond of the cover art. I don't think his picture is flattering, but it's the content that counts. And once again, a tremendously good album. You know what? Let's hear some snippets.
I'm so glad she's mine. When we go out to party, we have a good time, and we smile as lovers do. But this whole world is breaking up. How long, baby?
During the last part of the 70s and the 80s and also the 90s, he was like constantly flying back and forth to the United Kingdom. And he left a big footnote up there. So he's been called the King of Northern Soul because of this. A little side note. There was one single which was released on Motown after the contract ended, and this was by the mid-70s. The demand for The Real Hummerdigger was so big in the United Kingdom that Motown, who owned all the material which was done in the early 60s by JJ, because they bought the whole thing from Ed Winstein, they re-released it on Motown. So now finally JJ had his Motown single, despite of what Marvin thought. So he kind of had a little victory, at least at that part. Unfortunately, and it's so unfortunately, but he reached a certain age. JJ Barnes passed away in December of 2022. I do hope that at one point someone or Motown will release this whole material which he had recorded on Motown actually. Maybe something for Record Store Day. Just skip a Monkees record, skip a Rolling Stones concert from the 70s, and maybe release a compilation with his Motown material, or reissue his Born Again or Sarah Smile album. The Sarah Smile album, you'll find that between 20 to 50 euro, depending on the condition. Born Again, 100 and upwards. I'm been offered a promo copy of this one, so I maybe sell mine, I don't know, because you're looking for something and then you've been offered like 2 within a month. So yeah, we will see. But anyway, instead of doing this, maybe JJ Barnes is another opportunity to do that. So that will be helpful for people who would love to have his material on vinyl and don't have the budget or are not willing to pay such a tremendous amount of money for it. Record store people, vinyl me please. Kraft, whoever's out there and might be listening, this would be great. So this was it for this week's episode. Thanks for watching. Thanks for sharing this with me, and I do hope you enjoyed that episode, and I see you next time. Listen to good music, maybe JJ Barnes, and have a great week. Bye.